I want you to try and imagine, just for a second, a genetically male lizard. It's out in the blistering heat of the Australian outback. And the ambient temperature out there spikes by just 3 degrees above normal.
Which doesn't sound like a lot, right?
Right, but to survive this, this intense thermal stress, the lizard's biology literally hits a panic button. It entirely bypasses its own DNA, it splices its RNA, and it completely transforms into a reproductive female, capable of laying eggs.
It is an absolute fundamental mutation.
Yeah. Now, I want you to imagine that exact same biological panic button being pushed across the entire human race.
It's a terrifying thought, honestly, because it forces us to completely reevaluate, well, everything. Everything we just assume about the stability of our physical identities, our societies, our future.
Yeah, what we view as these fixed rules of nature might actually be, highly conditional. Okay, so let's unpack this, because we are stepping way outside the standard historical narrative today. You're joining us for a deep dive into a really fascinating stack of documents. These analyze some of the most, frankly, misunderstood texts in human history, the prophecies of Nostradamus.
And we should clarify, this isn't about spooky poems or, reading tea leaves.
Right, no crystal balls here. The source material we're decoding today combines 16th century cipher techniques with, modern climate data, advanced biological research, and really granular sociological records.
Yeah, the whole premise of this research is that these texts aren't just vague guesses. They represent a highly specific, phase-by-phase manual, a manual for a systemic mutation of our entire global order.
A mutation triggered by the environment.
Exactly. It's a predictive landscape. It uses these astronomical triggers to forecast ecological collapse, and then subsequently, how our biology adapts to that collapse.
So our mission for you today is to walk through this exact timeline. We're going to look at the infamous year 1999, the terrifying king of terror, and this really mysterious figure known as AbhinavPuranPurush.
And according to the experts who compiled all these sources, these codes aren't failed predictions from the past.
Not at all. They align perfectly with the timeline that starts around June 2026 and hits this massive, unavoidable milestone in August 2026.
Right, and we'll trace a sequence of eclipses ending in 2027. These act as astronomical markers for just severe climate disasters. We're talking extreme water scarcity, the breakdown of global agriculture, civil war.
The works. But the real revelation here, and this is the core of our deep dive, is how those environmental shocks actually force human biology to mutate.
That's where the lizard comes in.
Exactly. We're going to explore how historical climate collapses triggered these profound gender crises, forcing a complete overhaul of what people believed and how they worshipped.
It's an intricate roadmap. It details the friction between a dying geopolitical system and the brutal restorative forces of natural law.
And ultimately, we're going to look at how humanity might emerge from this upcoming chaos, basically by abandoning those rigid, dying paradigms to build a new world. One based on internal resilience and this ancient concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the realization that the world is one family.
It's the only way forward, according to the text.
So before we go any further, though, I need to make a critical note for you, the listener. The sources we're exploring today touch on some highly sensitive, intensely debated modern topics.
Very heavily debated.
Yeah. We're going to be discussing gender fluidity, the collapse of traditional societal roles, and massive shifts in religious and political power structures. So we want to be absolutely 100% clear.
Yes.
We are not taking any political sides here.
No, not at all. Not left-wing, not right-wing.
We are not endorsing or advocating for the cultural or political viewpoints in these documents. Our strict goal is just to impartially report the sociological, biological, and historical connections presented in the source material.
We're simply the messengers. We're decoding the text so you can understand the argument being made by the researchers.
Right. Because the value here lies in understanding the complex mechanisms they're proposing, regardless of your personal ideology.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's start with the most glaring discrepancy in the whole Nostradamus mythos. Century 10, Quatrain 72. The pop culture narrative dictated that Nostradamus predicted the literal end of the world in the calendar year 1999.
Which obviously didn't happen.
Right. The year passed, nothing exploded, and it was widely written off like, oh, it's just a failed prophecy. But the documents suggest we completely failed to understand the language he was even using.
Well, yeah, the fundamental error was assuming a 16th century French astrologer who was heavily educated in Latin and classical antiquity was referencing the modern Gregorian calendar in a literal sense.
Like he was just circling a date on a desk calendar.
Exactly. The phrase he used, l'an 1999, it's actually a highly sophisticated cipher. He was utilizing the Roman numeral system, which historically served a very specific administrative purpose. It was used for tracking tax, agricultural, and debt cycles.
Hold on, I need to stop you there. Are you saying 1999 isn't a year at all? It's like a mathematical formula for tracking debt? How does that even work?
Well, consider the induction cycle. It was established by the Roman Emperor Diocletian back in 297 AD.
Okay.
It was a 15-year cycle used to assess agricultural wealth and basically levy taxes.
Mm.
Over centuries, this concept evolved into a much broader understanding of cyclical debt saturation.
Debt saturation, meaning the system just can't take on any more debt.
All right, so the numerals for 1999, M, CM, XC, IX, they actually represent a countdown of financial decay. M is 1,000, CM is 900, XC is 90, and IX is 9.
So it's a literal countdown.
Exactly. In the context of these prophecies, this sequence represents a countdown to the absolute saturation and subsequent implosion of the global financial framework.
So it's basically a global game of Jenga.
That's a great way to put it.
But instead of just crashing on a random Tuesday, the text claimed these 4 Roman numerals map flawlessly to a sequence of 4 specific lunar eclipses. So explain the mechanism here. How does a shadow on the moon dismantle international banking?
The sources posit this correlation between major astronomical cycles and macroeconomic behavior. And it operates on 2 levels.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, psychologically and agriculturally. Historically, financial markets are deeply tied to agricultural yields, right? Which are obviously influenced by seasonal and astronomical cycles.
Sure, crops rely on the seasons.
And second, in our modern era, massive volumes of high-frequency trading are algorithmic. Many of these quantitative models incorporate complex cyclical patterns, including astronomical data, to predict market sentiment and resource availability.
Wait, really? So it's like a self-fulfilling cycle built right into the architecture of global commerce?
Exactly the argument the sources make.
Yeah.
So the M, the 1000 in the countdown, represents the peak of Western financial sovereignty. It's the moment the foundational Jenga block is pulled.
And when is that?
This aligns perfectly with the lunar eclipse on August 28, 2026. The researchers identify this as the initial milestone, the unwinding of the Western-led financial order.
So August 2026 is the tremor.
It's the tremor that exposes the compromised foundation. And then this is followed by CM, the 900. That corresponds to the lunar eclipse on February 20 to 21, 2027.
Okay, so things are shaking.
Right. Then XC, the 90, matches the lunar eclipse of July 18 to 19, 2027. And finally, IX, the 9, represents absolute debt saturation. The system cannot absorb another single drop of liability.
Game over.
Yeah. That aligns with the lunar eclipse on August 16 to 17, 2027.
What does that actually look like for someone, waking up and checking their 401k or trying to pay a mortgage in September 2026? Are we talking about standard inflation, or is it's a complete freezing of global assets?
The texts point toward a cascading systemic failure. Once the primary pillar, which is the financial architecture, once that loses its structural integrity, all the interconnected global systems just follow.
Because everything runs on money.
Exactly. Supply chains freeze up because letters of credit are no longer trusted. And when supply chains freeze, basic resources become incredibly scarce. This triggers the collapse of political structures and, eventually, social cohesion.
The ultimate domino effect.
Yeah.
And the text points out another really crucial detail in the 1999 quatrain, right? The 7th month. Pop culture always assumed that meant July.
Right, because July is the 7th month to us.
But the sources argue it actually points to September, which completely shifts the timeline of this collapse.
It does. Because Nostradamus operated under the Julian calendar, which begins in March, right at the spring equinox. Therefore, the 7th month is literally September. Astronomically, this is the autumn equinox.
March is month 1, so September is month 7.
And the symbolic weight of that shift is massive. If we connect this to the bigger picture established in the research, the spring equinox represents the waning era. Spring is associated with increasing light, which the text correlates to Western dominance, centralized authority, and predictable structured growth.
So the west is the spring, the light.
Right. And the autumn equinox in September marks the tipping point into the emerging era. This is characterized by decreasing light, mystery, Eastern resurgence, and decentralized fragmented control.
So the prophecy is outlining this massive geopolitical pivot. Around September 2026, the power literally shifts from the structured light of the West to the decentralized mystery of the East.
Precisely.
And the documents point out that another quatrain, Q67, perfectly aligns with this. It predicts an earthquake in Mortara, Italy, and a symbolic fall of Vatican or centralized religious power right around Easter.
Which is fascinating timing.
Yeah. Easter is obviously tied to the lunar cycle in early spring. So right as we hit that CM eclipse in February-March 2027, the established religious and political institutions in the West just start fracturing.
The sequence is incredibly methodical. August 2026 breaks the financial trust. February and March 2027 break the ideological and religious authority. And this sets the stage for the massive decentralized shift in September.
Okay, but if the financial system collapses in 2027, why does the text constantly mention nature intervening? I mean, finance is man-made. Where does biology or ecology fit into a banking crisis?
Well, this brings us to one of the most debated words in all of Nostradamus.
MBUS. Who or what is maybe yes?
Yeah, MBS. For centuries, scholars attempted to map Mabius to modern political figures, right? They were looking for leaders with phonetic similarities, like maybe it's an anagram for an American president or a Middle Eastern dictator.
Like we've all seen those late-night documentaries.
Exactly. But the source material discards that approach entirely. Mabius is not a politician. It is a Celtic time cycle and a code for a massive ecological filter process.
I need to understand the logic here. Because bridging a 16th century French prophecy with ancient Celtic codes and modern geopolitics, that's a huge leap. How do the sources justify that?
Through rigorous etymological and historical tracing, linguistically the word is split into two parts, MAB and US. MA traces back to the ancient Celtic goddess Queen Med, or Maeve, from the Irish mythological cycle of Connacht.
Wow, okay.
In pre-Christian Ireland, Med was not merely a royal figure. She was the literal embodiment of the earth's sovereignty. A king could only rule if he symbolically mated with Med.
So she's like Mother Nature with a sword.
Exactly. She represented the fierce, unyielding energy of nature, intimately tied to the mountains, the waters, and war.
So she is literally the earth defending itself.
She's the earth demanding a price for the resources it provides. And over centuries, as Christianity absorbed these myths, Queen Meb linguistically evolved in English folklore into Queen Meb, the fairy queen who controls the hidden desires, dreams, and primal, often destructive energies of humanity.
Shakespeare, he famously immortalized her as this chaotic, disruptive force in Romeo and Juliet.
Exactly. Okay, so that covers the MA.
What are the U.S.?
In Latin, adding the suffix us to a root word personifies that energy into a male form or a specific tangible entity. Emebus, therefore, represents this fierce, aggressive, sovereign, and militaristic energy of nature incarnated into a global power structure.
Okay.
The sources link this specific cycle of aggressive, resource-heavy geopolitical energy to the current Western hegemony, specifically America. Emebus is the embodiment of the dominant global superpower, leveraging military and financial might to extract and control the Earth's resources.
So Mebius isn't a person at all. It's the energy of the current American-dominated global system.
Right.
But the prophecy, Century 2, Quatrain 62, it says Mebus will soon die, then will come a horrible undoing of people and animals. If Mebus is this aggressive extraction system, wouldn't its death be a good thing? Why does the text frame it as a horrible undoing?
Because the disconnection of a deeply entrenched system is inherently violent. The death of Mabius means the overarching system of control, this artificial sovereignty that has organized global supply chains, energy extraction, and borders, suddenly unplugs.
It's like trying to shut off a massive runaway nuclear reactor by just ripping out the control rods. You stop the process, but the immediate blowback is catastrophic.
That's a perfect analogy. The sources outline this period, which runs roughly from August 2026 to April 2029, as a time of extreme vengeance from nature. With the artificial constraints of the Mabio system failing, the Earth violently attempts to restore equilibrium.
And the text describes 100 hands' thirst and hunger.
Yes, thirst and hunger, which implies a direct failure of our ecological life support systems.
So we're talking about famine and drought.
Severe famine and drought, and this period of natural retribution culminates with an astronomical marker, a comet in the sky.
Let me guess.
The sources point to the asteroid Apophis, which is scheduled to pass dangerously close to Earth in April 2029. They also draw a really compelling parallel here to Mother Shipton, the 16th century British prophetess.
Oh, I'm familiar.
She predicted a generational global conflict that would end with a comet, explicitly marking the end of the era of the Fairy of
The
Dreams.
Fairy of Dreams, which brings us right back to Queen Mab. That is a wild linguistic synchronicity.
It is. The interconnectedness of these global mythologies is central to the researcher's thesis. They link this directly to the Vedic Yuga cycle.
Okay, the Yuga cycle.
According to this ancient Indian framework of vast epochs of time, we are currently at the absolute end of the Dwapar Kali Yuga junction.
Break that down for me. What is the Dwapar Kali Yuga junction, and why does it matter for 2026?
Well, the Yugas are cyclical ages that track human consciousness and societal structure. The Kali Yuga is the age of darkness, materialism, and conflict. The researchers argue that the specific chronological timeline we're in right now was established after the massive global cataclysm of 536 AD.
536 AD. That year comes up constantly in historical disaster studies. That was the year the sun literally went dark.
Yes. Following the atmospheric events of 536 AB, humanity was forced to rebuild. We built the exact systems we rely on today.
Like what?
Centralized monotheistic religions to explain the trauma, modern financial frameworks to secure scarce resources, and rigid nation-states to defend borders. The Yuga cycle dictates that this 1500-year-old post-536 AD architecture has reached its expiration date.
It's done.
It's done. The death of Mebius is simply the alarm clock signaling that the mandated deconstruction has begun.
Okay, so let's trace the logic here. We pull the financial Jenga block in August 2026.
Right.
By early 2027, the institutions are fracturing, the Mebius system of geopolitical control starts shutting down, and nature begins its violent reboot.
Right.
That brings us to the climax of this timeline, the summer of 2027. The text mentions the King of Terror. Now, this sounds like the peak of the crisis.
The summer of 2027 is the convergence point of all these cosmic triggers. Recall the eclipse countdown. We talked about the XC and IX eclipses occurring in July and August 2027. We are looking at triple eclipse.
The triple eclipse.
Within a mere 30 days, the Earth will experience 2 lunar eclipses and 1 massive total solar eclipse.
3 eclipses in a single month. From an astronomical standpoint, what is the argument that this causes physical disasters on Earth?
The argument centers on gravitational syzygy.
Syzygy.
Syzygy. It's the alignment of celestial bodies and its historical correlation with terrestrial volatility. The focal point is August 2, 2027. On this day, the longest total solar eclipse of the 21st century will occur. The path of totality will cross directly over the Mediterranean, North Africa, and the Middle East.
Wow.
Nostradamus refers to this specific solar eclipse as the Great King of Terror descending from the sky.
So the King of Terror isn't an invading dictator. It's not a person. It's the literal shadow of the moon.
In Vedic astrology, this event is characterized as Rahu, the shadow planet, the severed dragon's head eclipsing the sun. Rahu represents sudden, catastrophic illusion. It is an energy of pure disruption, bringing massive political upheaval and black swan events.
But the physical, environmental fallout detailed in the documents goes way beyond just political upheaval, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We are looking at a comprehensive breakdown of the Earth's atmospheric and geological balance.
I want to know exactly what the texts predict happens on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Because catastrophic illusion is a bit vague. Are we talking about storms, earthquakes?
We're talking about all of it. The sources predict a surge in volcanic eruptions, which would inject massive amounts of sulfur aerosols into the stratosphere.
Just like 536 AD.
Exactly. We see predictions of massive tsunamis threatening coastal infrastructure. Extreme solar flares, what Nostradamus calls the law of Sol, or the scorching light disrupting our electromagnetic grids.
The law of Sol. If the Earth is baking under extreme heat and our electrical grids are frying from solar flares, we aren't pumping water. We aren't irrigating crops.
That's exactly the sequence. This leads to mega droughts, resulting in severe, immediate water scarcity. And this is not just a lack of drinking water, it means the total cessation of global agriculture.
And when agriculture fails, famine is instantaneous.
Furthermore, the lack of clean water guarantees explosive outbreaks of waterborne diseases. Challenges involving water become the defining crisis of this period.
And its society is only ever about, 9 meals away from anarchy?
Yes. Quatrains 61 through 65 describe the West plunging into civil war conditions. The texts describe riots in the streets over basic resources, the collapse of NATO, and the dissolution of European naval fleets due to logistical failures.
They can't even fuel the ships.
Right. The documents explicitly mention undefended European coastal cities being looted by external forces, likely from regions experiencing the famine even more acutely.
Man, this sounds identical to the admonitions of Epure from the Egyptian collapse. That papyrus describes the 4.2 kiloyear event around 2200 BC. The rivers run dry, the elites are wandering in rags, former servants are hoarding food, the social hierarchy completely inverts.
It's a very apt comparison. The experts in the source material make that exact parallel. They view the impending 2027 reality through the lens of two massive historical climate shocks: the 4.2 kiloyear event and the 536 AD volcanic winter.
We mentioned 536 AD earlier. Let's really dig into that because scientists literally refer to it as the worst year to be alive in human history.
Yeah.
What was the daily reality for a person living through that?
It was unimaginably bleak. A massive volcanic eruption, possibly combined with a comet fragment, created a dense dust veil. It blanketed Europe, Asia, and the Middle East for 18 full months.
18 months.
The Byzantine historian Procopius wrote that the sun gave forth its light without brightness like the moon during the whole year. Cassiodorus noted that men marveled to see no shadows of their bodies at noon.
A year and a half of twilight. The psychological toll alone would be devastating.
And the physical toll was worse. It triggered a little ice age. Summer snowfalls wiped out entire harvests. The lack of sunlight caused massive vitamin D deficiencies across the entire population, which fundamentally weakened human immune and endocrine systems.
Basically, global immunosuppression.
Which set the perfect stage for the plague of Justinian in 541 AD, a bubonic plague pandemic that wiped out up to 50% of the population in affected regions.
And when half the population dies, the rules of society don't just bend, they evaporate.
Completely. Historical accounts from figures like John of Ephesus describe corpses just piling up in churches and streets. Survival became the only operative metric. Parents abandoned infected children. The concepts of morality, property rights, and social obligation completely dissolved. Old modes of worship and belief were totally shattered.
Which makes sense. If you pray for the sun to come back and it doesn't, you stop believing in whatever a system told you to pray.
Exactly.
Now, here is where the deep dive gets really profound. We usually think of societal collapse as just people acting badly because they are starving. But these sources take it a massive step further.
They do.
They argue that when the environment undergoes extreme stress, it's not just our culture that breaks down. Our biology literally hits a panic button. Our bodies scramble their own codes to try and survive. Which brings us to the most debated, perhaps most shocking part of this research, the biological gender crisis.
This is the crux of the argument. The sources reveal that extreme climate disasters don't just destroy infrastructure, they fundamentally alter the biological, reproductive, and gender behaviors of both animals and humans.
And this is what Nostradamus meant.
Yes, this is the true hidden meaning behind Nostradamus' warning about the horrible undoing of animals and people.
I am going to need you to walk me through the science on this very carefully. You are saying weather changes gender.
We can observe this mechanism actively operating in the animal kingdom right now. Consider reptiles that rely on temperature-dependent sex determination, or TSD.
Okay, TSD.
The ambient temperature of the egg during the middle third of embryonic development dictates whether the hatchling will be male or female. Under current climate warming, this ancient system is just failing.
This is happening with turtles, right?
Yes. For the painted turtle, research shows that a rise in average July temperatures of just 1.85 degrees Celsius causes nests to produce 100% female hatchlings.
Just under 2 degrees.
An increase of 4 degrees completely wipes out male production. On the northern Great Barrier Reef, a massive study found that over 99% of juvenile and subadult green sea turtles are now born female. The sand is literally too hot to incubate males.
99% female. That's a functional extinction event for that specific population.
It is.
But the sources mention something even more extreme happening in Australia, the central bearded dragon. We talked about this at the very beginning of the show.
Right. And this is where we move from temperature-dependent development to active genetic mutation. Bearded dragons possess sex chromosomes, similar to birds. Genetic males are ZZ, and genetic females are ZW.
Okay, standard genetics so far.
However, scientists discovered that when these eggs are incubated at extreme heat between 34 and 37 degrees Celsius, the genetic males, the ZZ embryos, undergo a process called RNA splicing.
Break down RNA splicing for me. What is actually happening at a molecular level?
RNA splicing is a process where the pre-messenger RNA is edited before it is translated into a protein. In the heat-stressed bearded dragons, the extreme temperature triggers the RNA to essentially edit out the instructions for male sexual development.
Wow.
The genetic code is ZZ, but the body physically develops into a fully functioning reproductive female. It overrides its own chromosomal blueprint.
A genetically male lizard literally morphs into a female because the environment got too hot.
And crucially, their behavior changes as well. These sex-reversed females exhibit highly aggressive, bold behavior far exceeding the aggression levels of typical genetic females.
So the panic button triggers a behavioral change too.
Nature is forcing a drastic mutation to ensure survival, creating highly aggressive, hyper-resilient super females in response to acute thermal stress.
That is deeply unsettling. And the document suggests it's not just heat. Chemical pollution is acting as an environmental stressor too.
The synergistic effect of heat and endocrine-disrupting chemicals is devastating aquatic life. Agricultural runoff introduces chemicals like atrazine, BPA, and synthetic estrogens into our waterways.
Right, farm runoff.
As water temperatures rise, the metabolic rate of fish increases, causing them to absorb these toxins at a highly accelerated rate.
And what happens to the fish?
In rivers across the UK and the US, researchers are finding male roach and minnowfish developing eggs inside their tests.
Inside their testes.
Yes. The chemical and thermal stress causes the male liver to overproduce phytologinin, which is an egg yolk protein normally only found in females. This feminizes the male reproductive tract, creating an intersex condition that just plummets fertility rates and threatens the entire ecosystem.
Okay, so painted turtles are entirely female, the bearded dragons are splicing their RNA to reverse their sex, and the male minnows are growing eggs in their tests. That is profound biological chaos in the animal kingdom.
It really is.
But to apply this to humans, I mean, that is a massive leap. The sources are arguing that this same biological panic button exists in our genetics.
They argue that humans are not exempt from the laws of biology. To understand how human sociology and biology collapse under stress, the experts point to the seminal 1960s experiment by ethologist John B. Calhoun, known as Universe 25, or the behavioral sink.
The famous rat utopia experiment. I know this one.
Yeah.
It starts as a paradise and ends in absolute horror.
Exactly. Calhoun built a massive enclosure designed to be a utopia for mice. Unlimited food, unlimited water, perfect climate control, and zero predators. He introduced 4 pairs of mice. The population naturally exploded, but Calhoun artificially restricted one crucial resource: physical space.
So they had everything they needed to survive physically, but they were trapped in an overcrowded megacity. What happened?
As the population density reached a critical overcrowded mass peaking around day 315, a phenomenon Calhoun called the behavioral sink set in. The social architecture completely collapsed. The males, unable to defend territory in the overcrowded space, lost their traditional biological roles. They fractured into 2 distinct groups.
What were the groups?
One group became hypersexual, indiscriminately aggressive, and violent. The other group, which Calhoun termed the beautiful ones, withdrew completely from society. They isolated themselves in the upper pens, doing nothing but eating, sleeping, and grooming their fur. They abandoned all interest in mating, socializing, or defending territory.
They completely opted out of the biological imperative to reproduce.
Yeah.
And the females?
The females experienced an equally profound mutation. Deprived of the protection of territorial males, they became hyper-aggressive to defend their nests. Eventually, they lost their maternal instincts entirely. They began attacking, neglecting, or simply abandoning their own pups. Infant mortality skyrocketed to over 90%. By day 600, all reproduction ceased. The population aged out, and by day 920, Universe 25 was on an irreversible path to complete extinction, despite having infinite food and water.
The environmental stress of overcrowding completely destroyed their biological drive to continue the species, and the sources draw a direct line between the mice in Universe 25 and historical human collapses.
Absolutely. The documents argue that human societies react to extreme ecological, demographic, or spatial stress with similar, profound behavioral and biological shifts.
Going back to 536 AD again.
Right. During the 536 AD darkness, historians and medical anthropologists noted massive hormonal imbalances in the surviving populations. The sheer lack of sunlight and severe starvation caused human endocrine systems to malfunction.
How did that manifest physically?
Historical records note a rise in hirsutism, abnormal facial and body hair growth in women, alongside the physical feminization and loss of vitality in starving men.
The body shuts down normal reproductive functions because it is scrambling all available energy just to survive the winter.
Yes.
But it's not just physical changes, right? The sources highlight incredible historical examples of entire societies blurring or flipping their gender roles to survive crises.
Yes. When a society faces a crisis that destroys the traditional male role, whether through environmental failure or massive casualties of war, nature forces a sociological and biological mutation. The text points to the Scythian Eneries.
The Scythians were the ancient nomadic warriors on horseback, correct?
Correct. The Greek physician Hippocrates extensively documented them. The Scythian men spent their entire lives on horseback without the use of stirrups. This constant, extreme physical trauma caused severe damage to their lower bodies, often resulting in complete impotence.
Wow.
This physical failure of the traditional biological male role led to the creation of the Aneries.
What did the Aneries do?
These impotent warriors adopted female clothing, took on female societal roles, and were revered as highly powerful shamans and diviners. Hippocrates explicitly linked their physical environmental trauma directly to their sociological gender transformation. The society adapted to the biological failure by creating a new essential spiritual role for them.
That is wild. And then the sources mention the Dahomey Amazons, the Agoge.
A textbook example of demographic stress forcing a societal mutation. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the Dahomey Kingdom in West Africa lost a massive portion of its male population due to the relentless Atlantic slave trade and continuous regional warfare.
Facing an existential threat.
Exactly. With a depleted male defense force, the society radically adapted.
The women stepped into the void.
Thousands of women completely abandoned traditional maternal and domestic roles to form an elite, ultra-aggressive military regiment. They lived in the royal palaces, took strict vows of celibacy, and defended the kingdom with unparalleled ferocity. When the biological males disappeared, the females mutated sociologically and in their behavioral aggression to fill the defensive void.
It is the exact human equivalent of the bearded dragons. The environment shifts in Dahomey's case, the men are wiped out, and the females become hyper-aggressive defenders to ensure the survival of the group.
The parallels are undeniable. The sources also cite the galley priests of ancient Rome. During times of severe ecological stress, when changing weather patterns threatened the agricultural harvest, these priests of the earth goddess Cybele would perform ecstatic rituals culminating in self-castration.
Desperate times.
They adopted female dress and behavior in a radical, desperate attempt to appease the Earth Mother and ensure the fertility of the failing crops.
And the sources bring this all the way up to the modern era, mentioning Weimar Germany.
Right. Following the devastating meat grinder of World War I, Germany experienced profound economic starvation, hyperinflation, and deep psychological trauma. The traditional, rigid, patriarchal structures of the German Empire had completely failed them. In the ensuing chaos of the Weimar Republic, there is an unprecedented explosion of gender fluidity and the intentional blurring of sexual boundaries.
Berlin became the epicenter of this.
Exactly. Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld established the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin during this exact period, performing some of the first modern gender affirmation surgeries and advocating for the recognition of a spectrum of sexual identities. The argument is that the massive societal trauma and economic stress acted as a catalyst for breaking down rigid biological and gender norms. The society was mutating in the ruins of the old empire.
I need to stop and process this, because the implications for today are staggering. The experts in these documents are essentially arguing that climate change and environmental stress aren't just making the weather worse, they're actively altering human biology and behavior right now.
The modern data cited in the research supports this thesis. The sources link rising global temperatures to direct, measurable changes in human neurobiology.
Give me an example.
During extreme heat waves, there are significant spikes in intimate partner violence, or IPV, and femicide globally. The acute heat alters brain chemistry, increasing impulsivity, aggression, and the breakdown of emotional regulation.
The UN literally calls climate change a threat multiplier.
Precisely. Furthermore, psychiatric studies on the aftermath of severe climate disasters like major floods or hurricanes demonstrate significantly higher rates of complex PTSD, anxiety, and deep psychological trauma in young girls compared to boys. The environmental stress is already fracturing our psychological and social stability along gendered lines.
So the argument the sources are making is that as resources vanish post-2026, the biological safety valves of human nature will trigger profound behavioral mutations, exactly like Universe 25 or the Dahomey Kingdom.
Yes. The social and identity turbulence we see dominating the news every day, the intense debates over gender fluidity, the shifts in traditional family roles, the extreme polarization, The sources argue that we are misdiagnosing this entirely.
We treat it as a political failing or a cultural trend.
But the text argues it is an unconscious biological symptom. Our bodies and our collective subconscious are sensing the impending environmental stress, the approaching failure of the AbhinavPuranPurush extraction system.
Wow.
We are mutating socially and biologically to prepare for survival. Before the king of terror, the peak environmental collapse even arrives. We are undergoing a systemic biological mutation driven by ecological dread.
Which brings us to the ultimate question, the climax of this deep dive. We've traced the financial collapse starting in 2026, the triple eclipse and the physical destruction of 2027, the civil war, and these profound biological mutations. Where does this end? Does humanity just follow the path of Universe 25 and go extinct in a behavioral sink?
Not necessarily. The sources outline a clear divergence, a literal splitting of paths for humanity. By 2029, the old financial, political, and social systems, that entire massive architecture built since the trauma of 536 AD, will be entirely in ruins.
So what's the turning point?
The exact date provided by the calculations is November 20th, 2029.
November 20, 2029. Let me guess, that's mathematically tied to the eclipses as well.
It is exactly a 12,260-day cycle from the initial trigger point in June 2026. The texts describe this specific moment as a complete divine disconnection. It represents a massive spiritual and structural void where the old rules simply no longer apply. The grid goes down permanently.
A divine disconnection. That sounds incredibly bleak. What does that actually look like for someone waking up on a Tuesday in November 2029?
It is the ultimate loyalty test. From the rubble of the old world, humanity will face a choice and split into two distinct paths to navigate this new, mutated reality.
Okay, let's examine path one. The sources call this the domain of Rahu, or the beast. Explain the mechanics of this path.
Path one is the path of illusion and resistance. It is driven by a desperate, terrified clinging to the external macrostructures that are actively decaying. People on this path will attempt to preserve the status quo at all costs.
So fighting the mutation.
Yes. The sources explicitly link this path to the prophecies of Revelation 13, the rise of the technological and artificial beasts.
The beast. So we're talking about doubling down on artificial intelligence, mass surveillance, and authoritarian control to force order out of the chaos.
Exactly. It's the reliance on artificial systems to save us from natural collapse. Geopolitically, the texts associate this path with the rapid hybrid warfare expansion of Asian military and economic power, referred to by Nostradamus as the King of Anglemore.
What does hybrid warfare look like in a collapsed world?
It involves leveraging what little technological infrastructure remains, cyber attacks, control of surviving satellite arrays, monopolizing the remaining potable water sources to exert totalitarian control over desperate populations. It is an attempt to maintain the AbhinavPuranPurush energy through sheer force.
Right.
But the sources issue a severe warning. Those who choose this path will be permanently trapped in the continuous sorrow, anxiety, and violent illusion of the Kali Yuga. It is a path of perpetual suffering because it fights the natural evolutionary mutation.
I want to use an analogy here to make sure I understand. If the world is a failing electrical grid, path one is like trying to daisy chain thousands of extension cords to a dying, sputtering diesel generator. You are desperately trying to keep the old lights on, but the generator is failing, and the cords are sparking and starting fires everywhere.
That is an incredibly accurate analogy. Path one is the forced, centralized illusion of power.
Okay, so what is path two, the survival path?
Path two is referred to as the domain of Jupiter. It represents the emergence of what Nostradamus called the law of Sol, the eternal, uncompromising law of nature.
How do you survive the law of Sol if it's the very thing causing the droughts and the solar flares?
By aligning with it rather than fighting it. To use your analogy, path two is unplugging from the dying generator entirely. It requires a strategic, intentional withdrawal from the failing systems.
Just walking away.
It means total detachment from the dying order, abandoning the centralized financial grids, the political tribalism, and the rigid gender and societal roles that no longer serve a survival purpose. It requires a profound reliance on internal resilience and foundational spiritual wisdom.
You are abandoning the city to learn how to build your own solar panels and catch your own rain. But what does that new society actually look like?
Well, if we look at historical precedents, society survived the 4.2K event and the 536 AD collapse by fundamentally restructuring. They abandoned the massive, centralized, resource-heavy cities that could no longer be sustained. They dispersed into smaller, localized, highly resilient, decentralized communities.
So scaling down.
Yes. They relied on local agricultural networks and deep community bonds rather than distant governments.
The Jenga tower falls, so you use the scattered blocks to build a wide, flat foundation.
Precisely. Future survival requires abandoning the rigid, centralized systems of the past. The texts explicitly state this includes abandoning the gender problem, the societal fixation on rigid biological roles, that nature itself is actively mutating. The goal of Path 2 is to build a new society based on a very ancient Vedic concept, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. The world is one family.
Yes. But it is not merely a poetic phrase, it is an evolutionary survival strategy. It demands a societal paradigm shift away from hyper-individualism, resource hoarding, and nationalism. It requires a recognized, deeply shared global kinship, lived out practically in decentralized, resilient local communities.
Because if the water runs out, your neighbor isn't your competitor anymore. They are the only person who can help you dig a new well.
Exactly. And crucially, this path is guided by the guru principle within each individual. It does not rely on an external savior, a politician, or a king of terror. It relies on the internal compass of truth, adaptability, and mutual aid.
Relying on yourself and your community.
The researchers conclude that only those anchored in this internal truth will possess the clarity to navigate the chaos of the 2020s and seed the new global order.
Yeah, and this is a staggering amount of information to process. Let's take a breath and synthesize this incredible journey. We started with Nostradamus, stripping away the literal calendar myth of 1999 to reveal a highly precise financial countdown map to eclipses, starting in August 2026.
Right, the financial unwinding.
And then we uncovered the death of ABS, the violent unplugging of our aggressive geopolitical operating system. We stared down the terrifying triple eclipse of 2027 and the impending climate, water, and civil war chaos.
And we explored the profound biological reality underpinning this crisis. We examined how environmental collapse doesn't just change the weather. It forces animals like turtles and bearded dragons and human societies throughout history to completely mutate their biology, their genders, their behaviors, and their structures to survive.
And finally, we saw the ultimate split. The roadmap for a new society rising from the ashes of 2029. Path 1, the desperate, tech-driven authoritarian illusion of the beast. Or Path 2, the internal truth of Jupiter, unplugging from the dying grid to build a resilient world rooted in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
It outlines a systemic mutation on every conceivable level of existence.
To close this out, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. We look at the world today, the intense social divisions, the profound exhaustion, the confusing, often angry turbulence around identity, gender, and societal roles. We treat these exclusively as political battles, as moral failings of one side or the other.
We do.
But if these sources are right, if extreme environmental stress forces biology to completely rewrite the rules of behavior in animals in human history, perhaps the turbulence we are experiencing today isn't a political failing at all.
This raises a profound question about human agency. What if the culture wars are merely biological reflexes?
Exactly. What if this intense social turbulence is the very first unconscious biological symptom that our environment is already critically failing? What if our bodies and our societies are desperately trying to mutate, scrambling the codes to prepare for survival before the shadow of the King of Terror even arrives in the sky?
It fundamentally changes how you view everything and everyone around you. It replaces judgment with an understanding of our shared biological vulnerability.
Suddenly, the people you disagree with aren't just political opponents. They are fellow organisms reacting to the exact same unseen environmental dread. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We encourage you to look at the news, look at history, and look at yourself through this fascinating new lens. Until next time.